They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story, every story hides a lie. Before we get started with today's episode, I got to thank my Patreon exclusive member for recommending this whole idea once again. If you want to become a member of our Patreon, use the link in the description. It's only $1 a month, and you get access to exclusive briefings, classified briefings that are not available to the public for only $1 a month. Use the link in the description for my Patreon. August 29th, 1990. Los Angeles, the tail end of summer. The heat in the city is oppressive. The kind of dry, relentless heat that seems to bake the smog right into the pavement. In the hills of Griffith Park, the dry brush is waiting for a spark. Down on Hillhurst Avenue, inside a sprawling historic home, hidden behind overgrown foliage, something is rotting. The house belongs to a man named Manley. A strange name for a strange man. To his neighbors, he is simply the Sage, a gentle 6'4" giant who lumbers around his garden, tending to his plants, feeding the neighborhood cats, and occasionally waving to passerbys. He's an old man now, nearing his 9th decade. He is soft, he is slow, but inside that house, inside the mind of that old man, lies a library of information so vast, so dangerous, and so specific that it has been monitored by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 50 years. On this particular afternoon, the silence in the house is broken by the sound of heavy boots. Police officers. They've been called to the scene. The air inside is cold, stagnant, and carries a scent that no police officer ever gets used to. It's the sweet, cloying, unmistakable smell of death. But it's mixed with something else, the smell of neglect. The smell of a house that has been turned into a prison. They move through the hallway past shelves lined with artifacts that belong in a museum. Statues of Egyptian gods, rare Tibetan scrolls, ciphers from the 16th century. They enter the bedroom, and there he is, Manly Palmer Hall, the greatest occult philosopher of the 20th century, the man who wrote the encyclopedia of all human wisdom before he was 30 years old. The man who claimed to know the secret destiny of the United States. He is not lying peacefully in his bed. He is positioned with his hands folded over his chest, drifting off into the great beyond. He is sitting up. He is slumped in a chair in the corner of the room. His massive frame is collapsed in on itself. He's wearing a shirt that hasn't been changed in days. And as the officers step closer, shining their flashlights into the dim corner, they see movement. The floor is moving, the chair is moving, the body is moving. It's ants, a river of Argentine ants, millions of them, flowing in a dark, shimmering line from the garden, through the cracks in the window frame, across the floorboards, and swarming over the body of the philosopher. They are crawling over his hands, hands that once shook the hands of astronauts and presidents. They're crawling over his face. They're crawling into his mouth. He has been dead for hours, maybe days. The heat of the Los Angeles summer has accelerated the process. But there's something else. Something the homicide detectives notice immediately. There's fluid, dark, viscous fluid purging from his nose and mouth. In forensic terms, this is often a sign of decomposition. Yes, but it's also a sign of suffocation. It is a sign that the lungs were compressed. It is a sign that the life didn't just leave him, it was squeezed out of him. The police report will eventually rule it natural causes. Arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease, just another old man whose heart gave out. But the detectives on the scene aren't burying it, not for a second, because the scene is too chaotic. The drawers have been pulled open, the safe is unlocked. Millions of dollars in rare coins, ancient stamps, and gold artifacts are missing. And standing in the corner of the room, watching the police work, is a man named Daniel Fritz, a man who isn't family, a man who isn't a longtime friend, a man who just days before convinced Manly P. Hall to sign a document giving him total control over the Hall estate. It looks like a looting. It looks like a coup. But to those who have actually read the books written by the man in the chair, it looks like a ritual. 60 years prior to this moment, this man walked into the bank in San Francisco. He was a 27-year-old kid with no college degree, no family fortune, and no job. He placed the modern equivalent of $1 million in cash on the counter and paid to print a book so big it required a custom carrying case, a book so accurate that high-level Freemasons, men who had guarded their secrets with blood oaths for centuries, read it and asked, how did he know? He told us the plan, he showed us the blueprints. He told us that America wasn't a democracy, but a designated experiment. He told us that the Great Seal of the United States was a summoning circle, and then he died, surrounded by insects while vultures picked his estate clean. Was Manly P. Hall a prophet? Was he a spy? Or was he the architect of the very prison we are living in today? Welcome back to the Broken Truth Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett. We do not do true crime here. We do true history, the history that hurts, the history that they redact from the textbooks and bury in the footnotes. We're the only podcast investigating the architecture of reality, the stories that slip through the cracks of the mainstream narrative. We don't just read the headlines, we read the rituals. Today, we're opening the big book. We are investigating the life, the work, and the suspicious death of Manly Palmer Hall. If you've ever looked at the back of the $1 bill and wondered, why is there a floating eye above an Egyptian pyramid? You're looking at Manly P. Hall's influence. If you've ever wondered why politicians perform strange ceremonies at the Bohemian Grove, you're looking at the traditions Hall cataloged. He is the connection between the ancient world of magic and the modern world of politics. He is the missing link. Before we descend into the archives, do me a favor, look at your app, tap follow on Spotify. We drop deep dive investigations 5 days a week, and the algorithm hates what we're doing. Help us break the truth and tap follow now. Let's begin. To understand the conspiracy, we have to understand the cover story. And to be fair, the cover story of Manly P. Hall is fascinating, enough in its own. If you go to Wikipedia right now, or if you read the biographies sanctioned by the Philosophical Research Society, you get the story of a prodigy, a Mozart of mysticism. Manly Palmer Hall was born on March 8, 1901, in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, the dawn of a new century. The world was changing rapidly. The Victorian era was dying, and the industrial age was roaring into life. His father was a dentist, his mother was a chiropractor, which, you have to understand, in 1901 was radical fringe profession. Chiropractic was considered pseudoscience, bordering on mysticism itself. It dealt with energy flows and the alignment of the body. So, from birth, Hall is steeped in the alternative. Almost immediately, the chaos begins. His parents divorce. This is 1901. Divorce is a scandal. Young Manly is shuffled around, sent to live with his grandmother in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now picture this, a lonely, sickly boy in the middle of the American Midwest. He doesn't fit in. He's tall, gangly, awkward. He doesn't play baseball. He doesn't run with the other boys. He stays inside and he reads. And he's not reading Tom Sawyer. He's not reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He's reading about the Rosicrucians. He's reading about Egypt. He's reading about the Hermetic traditions of the Middle Ages. Where does a boy in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, get these books? That's the first question nobody seems to ask. The official story says he was self-taught, but you don't find the Corpus Hermeticum in a public school library in 1910. Someone was feeding him these books. Someone was guiding the curriculum. At age 18, he reunites with his mother in Los Angeles. Now, you have to understand Los Angeles in 1919. It wasn't just Hollywood. It wasn't just the movie business. It was the spiritual Wild West. It was a magnet for cults, gurus, mysticism, swamis, and con artists. Everyone was looking for the next messiah. The Spanish flu had just killed millions. World War I had just ended. People were traumatized. They were looking for answers, and traditional Christianity wasn't giving them what they needed. Young Manly steps into this carnival of souls. He is 19 years old. He is tall, over 6 feet. He has a heavy, piercing gaze, and he has a voice. People who heard him speak said it was hypnotic. He didn't use notes. He never prepared a script. He would stand at a podium, close his eyes for a moment, take a breath, and then speak for 90 minutes in perfect paragraphs. No ums, no ahs, no stuttering. Just a stream of consciousness that sounded like it was being dictated by an invisible intelligence. It was as if he was downloading the information in real time. By age 20, he is ordained as a minister in the Church of the People. By age 21, he is drawing crowds of thousands. He is selling out auditoriums that usually hosted opera singers. And then, at age 25, he decides he is going to write the book. Let's pause here. Think about what you were doing at 25. Maybe you were finishing grad school. Maybe you were working your first real job. Maybe you were still figuring out who you were. Manly P. Hall decides he is going to summarize the entire history of hidden knowledge, not just one part of it, all of it. He calls it The Secret Teachings of All Ages. The subtitle alone is a mouthful, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy. The official story says he raised the money through pre-orders and donations from wealthy widows who were enamored with his intellect. He hires the best printer in the West, John Henry Nash. He commissions an artist named J. Augustus Knapp to create watercolor paintings of the most esoteric symbols in history. The result, published in 1928, is a masterpiece of bookbinding. It is 2 feet tall. It weighs nearly 20 pounds. It cost $100 a copy in 1928 money. That is about $1,700 today per book, and it sells out. The book is an encyclopedia. It covers the ancient mysteries, Hermeticism, the Kabbalah, the Tarot, the cipher codes of Bacon and Shakespeare, the symbolism of plants, stones, and animals. It is so comprehensive that Albert Einstein reportedly had a copy on his desk. Elvis Presley was a devotee. He used to send his entourage to Hall's lectures to pick up pamphlets. Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the 6th man on the moon, was a personal friend of Hall's. According to the mainstream narrative, Hall takes the money and fame from his book and founds the Philosophical Research Society in 1934. He buys land in Griffith Park. He builds a campus that looks like a Mayan temple dropped into the middle of Hollywood. He spends the next 60 years sitting in that library, writing over 150 books, giving 8,000 lectures, and acting as a kindly grandfather figure to the lost souls of Los Angeles. He preaches a practical idealism. He tells people, don't try to summon demons. Try to be a better person. Use ancient wisdom to fix your marriage, to handle your stress, to understand your place in the cosmos. He is painted as the safe occultist. Aleister Crowley was the wickedest man in the world, doing sex magic and drugs in Italy. Manly P. Hall was the philosopher king, drinking tea, petting his cat, and talking about Pythagoras. That is the story they sell in the gift shop. A self-made scholar, a benign teacher, a man of peace. But there are holes in this story big enough to drive a tank through. Let's look at that math again. A high school dropout from Canada arrives in LA and within 5 years has access to the Vatican archives. He has access to the British Museum's restricted section. He has the specific, intricate details of Masonic rituals that, if revealed by a member, carried the penalty of having your tongue torn out and buried in the rough sands of the sea. The Masons officially claim Hall wasn't a member until 1954, 26 years after he published their secrets. Yet, when he published the book, the Masonic journals reviewed it and said, essentially, this is the greatest work ever done on our craft. How does an outsider write the insider's Bible? Unless he wasn't an outsider, unless the 27-year-old genius narrative is a cover for something much older and much more organized. To understand Manly P. Hall, you cannot look at him as a man. You have to look at him as a vessel. And to see what filled that vessel, we have to crack open the narrative. Wide open. This wasn't just a book release. This was an intelligence operation, and the target was the American mind. We've told you the story they want you to believe. The genius boy, the library, the kindly philosopher. Now let's take a sledgehammer to that story, because when you actually look at the timeline of Manly P. Hall's life, the genius scholar theory falls apart. It doesn't just bend, it breaks it. There are 3 major cracks in the narrative, and each one points to the fact that Hall wasn't just working for himself. Crack number 1. The impossible access. Let's go back to the book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I want you to really visualize this book. It's not just a paperback you pick up at the airport. It is a monolithic tome. It contains detailed specific breakdowns of the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, the Druidic rites of Britain, the Mithraic cults of Rome, and the inner workings of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. In the 1920s, this information did not exist in public libraries. It wasn't in the Encyclopedia Britannica. These were oral traditions. To learn the rituals of the Druids, you had to be a Druid, which was impossible, as they were extinct, or so we thought. To learn the secrets of the Rosicrucians, you had to be initiated into a lodge that officially didn't exist. So how did a 20-something Canadian kid with no university credentials get the data? There's a rumor persistent in occult circles for decades that Hall was given access to the Vatican secret archives. Now, think about that. The Vatican does not just let random Protestant boys from Los Angeles browse the stacks. They guard those archives with the Swiss Guard and centuries of bureaucracy. Unless he had a letter of introduction. Unless he was sent there. We know Hall traveled extensively in Europe right before the writing of the book. He went to London, he went to Paris, he visited the British Museum, but he wasn't just looking at exhibits. He was meeting people. The theory is this. The secret societies of Europe, the remnants of the true Rosicrucians, and the high-level Freemasons knew that a war was coming. They knew the 20th century was going to be an industrial meat grinder. They saw the rise of communism. They saw the rise of fascism. They knew that the old world was burning down. They needed to preserve the ancient wisdom before it was destroyed by modernity. They needed a scribe. They didn't need an old man who was stuck in his ways. They didn't need a European aristocrat who was too recognizable. They needed a blank slate. They needed a young man, charismatic American vessel. They found Manly P. Hall. They opened the doors. They gave him the manuscripts. He didn't write the book about them. He wrote the book for them. Crack number 2, the $1 million mystery. Then there's the money. In 1928, Great Depression was looming. The economy was shaking. People were starting to panic. Yet Hall produces a book that costs a fortune to print. The illustrations alone, done by J. Augustus Knapp, would have cost tens of thousands of dollars in today's money. The paper was watermarked. The binding was gold stamped. Who paid for it? The official story cites a woman named Mrs. Caroline Lloyd and her daughter, a wealthy oil money or banking money, depending on which source you believe. They were patrons of the arts. But why back an unproven 27-year-old on a project about magic? In the 1920s, this wasn't trendy. It was blasphemous. If you went around talking about summoning spirits and Egyptian gods, you weren't seen as an intellectual. You were seen as a heretic. Unless the money wasn't a donation, it was a budget. If you look at who surrounded Hall in those early years, it's a who's who of the American elite bankers, politicians, members of the Bohemian Club. These weren't hippies. They were the architects of capitalism. Why were the most powerful capitalists in America funding a book about Egyptian sorcery? Because they knew what Hall was revealing, that symbols rule the world. And if you control the symbols, you control the mind. They weren't paying for a history book. They were paying for an instruction manual. Crack number 3, the Masonic paradox. This is the smoking gun. Ask any Freemason about Manly P. Hall, and they will smile and say, "Oh yes, our greatest philosopher." The Scottish Rite Journal, the official publication of high-level Masonry, called The Secret Teachings the most important Masonic book of the 20th century. But here is the glitch in the matrix. Manly P. Hall was not a Mason when he wrote it. He did not join a lodge until 1954, 26 years after he published their secrets. He was initiated into Jewel Lodge number 374 in San Francisco. Later, he was given the 33rd degree, the highest honor, by the Scottish Rite. Think about the absurdity of this. Imagine a guy who has never played football writes the definitive playbook for the NFL, and the NFL coaches read it and say, "This is perfect, we're going to use this." And then, 26 years later, they let him join the team as a rookie. It doesn't make sense. Freemasonry is an order of secrets. You take blood oaths not to reveal them. If an outsider revealed them, they should be furious. They should be suing him. They should be silencing him. Instead, they embraced him. Why? There are two possibilities. Possibility A, Hall was a psychic spy who stole the secrets using remote viewing or astral projection. Possibility B, the Masonic leadership gave him the secrets because they wanted them public. Why would a secret society want their secrets to be public? Because of a concept called externalization of hierarchy. This is an occult term found in the works of Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky. It means that there comes a time in human history when the hidden masters must reveal themselves to the masses to prepare for a new age. Hall was the leaking mechanism. He was the valve they opened to flood the 20th century with occultism. He made it palatable. He made it intellectual. He made it safe for your dentist, your lawyer, and your politician to study magic. Finally, we have to talk about the end. If Hall was just a kindly old man, why was his death surrounded by sharks? In the late 1980s, Hall was suffering. His eyesight was failing. His memory was slipping. Enter Daniel Fritz. Fritz wasn't a scholar. He was a hustler. He presented himself as a healer, a banker, a fixer. He moved into Hall's house. He isolated Hall from his wife, Marie. He gained control of the PRS finances. Witnesses say Hall was being drugged. Kept in a stupor, Fritz convinced Hall that he could rejuvenate him using strange, pseudoscientific rituals and vitamin injections. In the days before his death, Hall signed a new will. He signed over the estate, the rare stamps, the coins, and the artifacts. When the police found the body, Fritz was there. He had already started cleaning up. The police report notes that Hall's body was found in a way that suggested he had been placed there. The ants, thousands of Argentine ants, were swarming him because he had been left covered in sugar or some other substance. Or was it just the neglect of a body left to rot in the heat? The autopsy was inconclusive, but the motive was clear. The sage was dead, the vault was open, and the secrets he had guarded for 60 years were up for grabs. This wasn't a peaceful transmission of wisdom. This was a hostile takeover, and it mirrors exactly what Hall said would happen to America, a nation built on high philosophy, looted by grifters from within. The cracks in the narrative are showing. The money came from the elite. The knowledge came from the shadows. The death came from a betrayal. So if Hall was a vessel, what was the message? What was the secret destiny he was told to write down? Because when you read his 1944 book, The Secret Destiny of America, you realize something terrifying. He wasn't predicting the future, he was reading the script. We have established the cracks in the foundation. We know the funding was impossible. We know the access was unprecedented. We know the death was suspicious, but pointing out the lies is the easy part. Any detective can spot a lie. The hard part is figuring out the truth that the lie is protecting. Why was a 27-year-old chosen to be the custodian of the world's most dangerous secrets? If we strip away the kindly librarian mask, 3 distinct theories emerge from the shadows. Each one is more disturbing than the last, and one of them involves the identity of the man who actually founded the United States. Not Washington, not Jefferson, but the ghost behind the machine. Let's descend into the first theory. This is the cynic's theory, but it is also the most politically plausible. It is called the externalization of the hierarchy. During the early 20th century, there was a massive shift in how secret societies operated. For thousands of years, they operated in total silence. If you were a Rosicrucian in 1600, you hid. If you were an alchemist in 1500, you worked in a cellar behind 3 locked doors. Why? Because the church would burn you. The king would behead you. The great work was a capital offense. But by 1900, the world had changed. The church had lost its teeth. Science was rising. The Industrial Revolution had changed the game. The hidden masters, the self-appointed guardians of human destiny, decided it was time to go public. They couldn't just walk out onto Broadway and say, "Hello, we are the Illuminati and we run the banks." That would cause a riot. They needed to condition the public. They needed a bridge. They needed to make the occult seem intellectual, safe, and even American. Enter Manly P. Hall. Look at him. He was tall, handsome, well-spoken, and distinctly not spooky. He didn't wear robes. He wore 3-piece suits. He didn't scream about Satan or blood sacrifice. He spoke out about philosophic democracy and ethical self-improvement. Theory 1 suggests that Hall was groomed by high-level Masons and Theosophists to be their public relations officer. His job was to take the scary blood oath rituals of the elite and repackage them as self-help for the American middle class. He was the soft disclosure. He was the friendly face masking a ruthless agenda to replace Christianity with a new scientific paganism. Think about it. Before Hall, if you wanted to know about the mysteries, you had to join a lodge. After Hall, you just had to buy a book. He democratized the symbols, but he kept the power structure intact. He told you what the pyramid meant, but he didn't give you the keys to the boardroom inside it. But if Hall was just a PR agent, why was he so obsessed with one specific historical figure? This brings us to theory 2, and this is where the rabbit hole goes vertical. You cannot talk about Manly P. Hall without talking about Sir Francis Bacon. If you read Hall's work, specifically The Secret Teachings and the Secret Destiny of America, you realize that Hall isn't just a fan of Bacon, he is a disciple. In fact, Hall dedicated huge portions of his life to proving that Francis Bacon was the most important man of the last millennium. Who was Francis Bacon? In the history books, he is the Lord Chancellor of England under King James I. He is the father of the scientific method, a brilliant lawyer and philosopher, but in the occult history, the history Hall subscribed to, Bacon was much more. Hall spent decades gathering evidence for the Baconian theory. This theory states that Francis Bacon was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I, that he was the true heir to the throne of England, but was hidden away to avoid a civil war. Denied his political birthright, Bacon decided to build a different kind of kingdom, a kingdom of the mind. Hall believed and published detailed proofs that Francis Bacon was the true author of the Shakespeare plays. He claimed that Shakespeare was just a mask, an illiterate actor paid to take the credit, while Bacon used the plays to inject Rosicrucian philosophy into the English language. Hall analyzed the original folios of Shakespeare and found complex ciphers, acrostic codes hidden in the text that spelled out Bacon's name and Masonic messages. Why does this matter? Who cares who wrote Hamlet? Because if Bacon wrote Shakespeare, and if Bacon was the head of the Rosicrucians, then the most influential literature in the English language was actually an intelligence operation designed to shape our culture. But it gets bigger. Bacon wrote a book called The New Atlantis. It was published in 1627, unfinished, after his death. In this novel, Bacon describes a utopian society. A ship gets lost in the Pacific Ocean and finds an island called Ben Salem. On the island, there is no poverty, there is no crime, there is perfect health. Why? Because the island is ruled by a secret order of scientists called Solomon's House. These scientists manipulate nature. They extend life, they create new species of plants and animals. They have flying machines, they have submarines, they have sound houses that can transmit voices over great distances. Remember, this was written in the 1600s. Bacon was predicting airplanes, telephones, and genetic engineering. Manly P. Hall looked at the New Atlantis and said, "This isn't fiction, this is a blueprint." Hall believed that America is the New Atlantis. He believed that Francis Bacon and his network of spies and philosophers designed the colonization of America specifically to create this philosophic empire. They sent settlers to Jamestown, not just to find gold, but to plant the seeds of a nation that would eventually be ruled by Solomon's House, a technocratic elite. Here is why the theory turns into a ghost story. Many of Hall's followers and hints within his own PRS archives suggest that Hall believed he was carrying the spirit of Francis Bacon, or, at the very least, that he was the chosen successor to finish Bacon's work. Look at the similarities. Bacon created an encyclopedia of knowledge. Hall created the Secret Teachings. Bacon was obsessed with ciphers. Hall wrote chapters on ciphers. Bacon wanted to build a great instauration, a restoration of knowledge. Hall built the Philosophical Research Society to do exactly that. In 1938, Hall even got involved in a bizarre treasure hunt. He believed that Bacon had buried a vault of manuscripts, the original Shakespeare plays, the true history of the world, and the blueprints for the New World Order, in a churchyard in Williamsburg, Virginia. The Bruton Vault. Hall used his influence to get permission to excavate. They dug. They found signs, strange brickwork, markers that matched Bacon's code. But then, the project was abruptly shut down by the authorities. The hole was filled. The truth was buried again. Why would a scholar be digging in a graveyard? Unless he was looking for his own legacy. If this theory is true, Hall wasn't just a writer. He was the project manager for a 400-year-old plan. He was checking the blueprints. He was ensuring that the New Atlantis, the USA, was on track to become the global superpower that Bacon envisioned. And what is the destiny of the New Atlantis? to rule the world through science and secrecy. But there is a third option, a third theory that paints Hall in a different light. Maybe he wasn't a villain, maybe he wasn't a spy, maybe he was the guy trying to stop the car before it went off a cliff. This is the warning voice theory. Hall wrote extensively about black magic, but he didn't mean guys in hoods casting fireballs. He was much more pragmatic. He defined black magic as the use of spiritual power for material gain. He looked at the 20th century and the rise of advertising, propaganda, psychological warfare, and atomic weapons, and he saw black magic everywhere. He saw that corporations and governments were using symbols and psychology to manipulate the masses. They were using the ancient wisdom to sell cigarettes and wars. In this theory, Hall released the secret teachings of all ages as an act of rebellion. He was Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. He realized that the elite were hoarding this knowledge of how the human mind works. They knew how to use symbols to control the subconscious. Hall published the book to say, here is how they are doing it. Here is the code. Learn it so you can defend yourself. He spent his life lecturing on ethics, on responsibility, on not being a slave to your desires. Why would an Illuminati shrill tell people to be moral and think for themselves? The Illuminati wants sheep, not philosophers. Unless the secret destiny had been hijacked. Unless the plan for the new Atlantis has been corrupted by greed. Hall might have been the old guard, the true believer in the philosophic empire, trying to remind the world of the original noble plan before the technocratic sorcerers, the modern deep state, took over completely. He was trying to democratize magic before the magicians destroyed the world. So which was he? The PR agent, the reincarnated master, or the warning voice? The answer might not be in philosophy. The answer might be in the files that the government kept on him. Because while Hall was writing about angels and demons, the FBI was writing about him. We have the files. We know who visited the library in Griffith Park. And we know that Hall didn't just write about the secret destiny of America as a fantasy. He wrote it as a policy paper. We are done with theories. Now we deal in facts. We're moving from the library to the war room. If you want to understand the architecture of the modern world, you don't read the New York Times. You read a thin, unassuming paperback published by Manly P. Hall in 1944. The world was burning in World War II. The outcome was uncertain. And yet, Hall sat down and wrote a book titled The Secret Destiny of America. This is not a conspiracy theory. You can buy this book on Amazon right now, but when you read it, the hair on the back of your neck will stand up, because Hall lays out in plain English that the United States was not founded as democracy. It was founded as a project, a designated experiment, and he provides the receipts. Let's start with the most obvious piece of evidence, the one you carry in your pocket every single day, the dollar bill. Do me a favor right now. Stop what you're doing, reach into your pocket, pull out a $1 bill. If you don't have cash, pull up an image on your phone. Turn it over. Look at the left side. The pyramid, the floating eye, the Latin words, annuit coeptis and novus ordo seclorum. We are told in school that this is just patriotic art. We are told the pyramid represents strength and duration. The eye represents God watching over us. Manly P. Hall tells us the truth. In The Secret Destiny, he explicitly details that this is the seal of the mystery schools. It is the sigil of the invisible government. Look at the pyramid again. It has 13 steps. It is flat on top. The capstone, the triangle with the eye, is not touching the rest of the structure. It is hovering. Why? Hall explains that the pyramid represents human society, the hierarchy. The base is the masses. The tops is the elite. But the stone is missing because the great work is not finished. The great work is the alchemical transformation of the world into a unified state. Only when the new order is established will the capstone descend and the structure be complete. And the eye. Hall writes that the eye represents the universal mind. Yes, but in the context of the state, it represents the all-seeing eye of the overseers, the unknown philosophers who guide the nation from the shadows. Now, here's the kicker. This symbol was on the Great Seal since 1782, but it wasn't on the money. It was just a government stamp used for treaties. It sat in a drawer for 150 years, until 1935. Who put it on the dollar bill? President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Who convinced him to do it? His Vice President and Secretary of Agriculture, Henry Wallace. Henry Wallace is a figure that history has tried very hard to forget. He wasn't just a politician. He was a mystic. He was a theosophist. He sent letters addressing him as Dear Father. He was obsessed with the prophecies of the return of Christ and the establishment of a global spiritual kingdom. And who was Henry Wallace's teacher? Who did he look to for spiritual guidance? Who did he correspond with? Manly P. Hall. We have the historical connection. Hall influenced Wallace. Wallace influenced FDR. FDR put the mark of the Illuminati, or the philosophic empire, on the global reserve currency. Think about the power of that. Every time you buy a coffee, every time you pay your rent, you are trading a talisman that declares the new order of the ages. You are physically participating in the ritual that Hall described. Hall didn't just write about history. He marked the money. He branded the empire. But the symbolism is just the tip of the iceberg. The real meat is in the prophecy itself. In The Secret Destiny of America, Hall makes a prediction that sounds more like a mission statement. Remember, this is 1944. The United Nations doesn't exist yet. The global village is science fiction. The internet is 50 years away. Hall writes, "The democratic commonwealth is the chrysalis of the philosophical empire." Let's translate that. A chrysalis is a cocoon. It is temporary. It is a container used to grow something else. Hall is saying that democracy, as we know it, voting, elections, sovereignty, the Constitution, is just the cocoon. It was never meant to last forever. It was designed to incubate the real government. The philosophical empire, a global federation ruled by the wise. He continues to predict that national borders must eventually dissolve. He predicts that patriotism to a country is a lower form of loyalty and must be replaced by loyalty to the world state. He writes that the Great Plan has been in motion for 3,000 years, moving from Egypt to Greece to Europe to America. America is not the final destination. America is the engine room. We are the muscle used to build the global state. Once the building is done, the muscle is no longer needed. The cocoon is discarded so the butterfly, the global technocracy, can fly. Did the government know about Hall's radical ideas? Oh, absolutely. The FBI kept files on the Philosophical Research Society for decades. We have the declassified memos. During the Cold War, anyone talking about global government was usually suspected of being a communist. The FBI looked at Hall, they tapped his potential connections, but never shut him down. They never arrested him. Why? If he was exposing the secret rulers, why didn't they silence him in 1940? Because he was useful. He was the controlled opposition, or perhaps the authorized biographer. By allowing Hall to publish these books, the elite could hide in plain sight. If someone accused the government of an occult conspiracy, they could point to Hall and say, "Oh, that's just fairy tales from that librarian in Griffith Park. That's science fiction." He became the plausible deniability. But the men in power, the astronauts, the politicians, the intelligence officers, they kept visiting his library. They kept asking for his advice. They kept reading his fairy tales as instruction manuals. In 1944, Hall wrote that the philosophical empire would be guided by science, but not the science of the microscope, the science of the human soul. He predicted a world where psychology and statecraft were merged. Look at where we are today. We live in a world of nudging, a world of behavioral economics, a world where algorithms know you better than you know yourself. The government doesn't just make laws anymore, it engineers social consensus. It manufactures consent. This is exactly what Hall described in his interpretation of Bacon's New Atlantis, a society run by Solomon's House, a collection of scientists and experts who operate above the law because they claim to possess superior knowledge. Hall warned us, or perhaps he promised us, that the state would eventually become the supreme power. He believed this was a spiritual evolution. He believed that humanity would voluntarily give up its individual rights to serve the great work of the collective. You will own nothing and you will be happy. This isn't just an economic forecast from the World Economic Forum. This is a spiritual doctrine. It is the idea that the individual is the problem and the collective is the solution. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill isn't just a symbol of God anymore. It is the camera on your street corner. It's the tracker in your pocket. It's the data center in Utah that records every email you send. Hall told us that the eye represents the unknown superiors, watching over the construction of the pyramid. Today, the pyramid is digital, and the eye is always open. The tragedy of Manly P. Hall is that he likely believed this was a utopia. He was an idealist. He thought that if the wise ruled the world, we would have peace. He thought that if we dissolved borders, we would end war. But he forgot the most basic lesson of history. The lesson Lord Acton taught us: power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The secret destiny of America was to build the engine for a one world system. We built it, it's here. The borders are dissolving, the culture is being homogenized. The old gods are being torn down to make room for the new god. Science unshackled from morality. We are living in the ruins of the Republic, watching the scaffolding of the empire go up. And the man who gave us the blueprints died alone, strangled in his chair, while the ants ate him alive. But to truly understand the tragedy of the ending, we have to go back to the specific symbols he warned us about. We talked about the pyramid, we talked about the eye. But there is another symbol on the Great Seal of the United States that Manly P. Hall spent pages analyzing, a symbol that changes the entire meaning of the American experiment. Look at the right side of the dollar bill, the eagle. We are told the bald eagle is a symbol of America because it is strong, it flies high, and it is native to this continent. But Hall tells us that the designers of the seal, the men who knew the secret wisdom, didn't intend for it to be an eagle at all. If you look at the original sketches of the Great Seal, the bird looks different. It has a longer neck. It has a tuft of feathers at the back of the head. It looks almost reptilian. Hall writes explicitly, here is a great secret. The bird on the Great Seal is not an eagle, but a phoenix. Why does this distinction matter? An eagle is a predator. It hunts, it kills, it rules the sky. But a phoenix is a mythical creature with a very specific life cycle. It lives for a period of time, grows old, and then it sets itself on fire. It burns to ash, and from those ashes, a new, younger, more perfect phoenix rises. The phoenix is the symbol of resurrection through destruction. If the United States represents the phoenix, then the destiny of the United States is not to live forever. Its destiny is to burn. Hall suggests that the secret destiny involves the deliberate destruction of the old order, the destruction of the American Republic itself, so that the New World Order can rise from its ashes. The chaos we see today, the burning of cities, the collapse of institutions, the erosion of history, in the eyes of the initiate, this isn't a failure of the system. This is the system working as intended. This is the fire that precedes the rebirth. The philosophic empire cannot be born until the democratic chrysalis is burned away. This is the terrifying logic of the occult philosopher. To them, destruction is a creative act. To the architect, the demolition of the old building is just the first phase of construction. But for the people living inside the old building, it's the apocalypse. Manly P. Hall understood this, and yet, he dedicated his life to teaching these principles. He believed that the average person needed to understand the mystery schools. So let's define that term. You hear it thrown around in conspiracy circles all the time. The mystery schools, the Babylonian mysteries. What does it actually mean? In the ancient world, in Egypt, in Greece, in Rome, education was divided into two tiers. There was the exoteric and the esoteric. The exoteric was for the masses. It was the simple stories, the myths. Zeus lives on a mountain and throws lightning bolts. Be good or the gods will punish you. It was designed to keep the population in line, to teach basic morality, and to maintain social order. The esoteric was for the initiates. These were the chosen few who were tested, vetted, and sworn to secrecy. They were taken into temples, the Great Pyramid, the Eleusinian caves, and they were taught the truth. They were taught that Zeus wasn't a guy on a mountain. He was a metaphor for a cosmic force. They were taught astronomy, mathematics, psychology, and magic. They were taught how to manipulate the masses, using the very myths the masses believed in. Manly P. Hall wrote The Secret Teachings of All Ages because he believed that the modern world had lost its mind. We had abandoned the exoteric religion. Christianity was declining, but we hadn't replaced it with the esoteric wisdom. We were drifting. We were a society of atheistic materialists with no moral compass. He wanted to revive the mystery schools. He wanted to create a new class of philosopher kings, men and women who were educated in the ancient laws of nature and spirit, who could lead humanity into a golden age. He built the Philosophical Research Society in Griffith Park to be the modern mystery school, a campus where you could learn the truths that had been hidden for thousands of years. But here's the flaw in his plan, the flaw that ultimately cost him his life. Hall believed that knowledge would make people good. He followed the Socratic idea that ignorance is the only evil. He thought that if you gave a man the secrets of the universe, that man would naturally become a benevolent leader. He was wrong. If you give a bad man the secrets of the universe, he doesn't become a saint. He becomes a sorcerer. He becomes a tyrant. He uses that knowledge to enslave, to steal, and to control. Hall spent 60 years gathering the most powerful knowledge in human history into one building. He created a honeypot, and eventually, the bears came for the honey. By the 1980s, Manly P. Hall was an institution. He was wealthy, famous in underground circles, and deeply respected. But he was also getting old. He was overweight, he had heart trouble, he was lonely. His wife, Marie Bauer Hall, was a brilliant but difficult woman. She was obsessed with her own theories about the Bruton Vault in Virginia. She spent years away from him, digging in churchyards, convinced she was going to find the lost manuscripts of Francis Bacon. This left Hall alone in that big house on Hillhurst Avenue, vulnerable. And this is where the story shifts from Indiana Jones to true crime. Enter the Predator. His name was Daniel Fritz. He appeared out of nowhere in 1987. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a philosopher. He was a smooth talker with a murky background in banking and a sudden intense interest in alternative healing. Fritz approached Hall not as a student, but as a savior. He told the aging philosopher, "You are sick. The doctors are killing you, but I can save you." He introduced Hall to a regimen of bizarre cleansing rituals, juice fasts, high colonic enemas, massive doses of vitamins. He convinced Hall that his obesity and his heart problems could be cured if he just purged the body from the toxin. Slowly, methodically, Fritz began to isolate Hall. He moved into the house, he replaced the staff, he intercepted phone calls. When old friends would call to speak to Manly, Fritz would answer and say, "Mr. Hall is resting. He cannot be disturbed. He is undergoing a healing crisis." It is the classic playbook of the elder abuser, the con artist, the vampire. But Fritz wasn't just after the money, though he was definitely after the money. He was after the legacy. He wanted to own the PRS. He wanted to be the heir to the throne of the philosopher king. He began to manipulate Hall's finances. He convinced Hall to sign over power of attorney. He started selling off the rare stamp collection, one of the finest in the world, and pocketing the cash. He looted the library of rare alchemical manuscripts. And Hall, the man who knew the secrets of the Egyptian priests, the man who could explain the psychological manipulation of the masses, why couldn't he see that he was being manipulated? This is the great irony. The genius is often blind to the obvious. Hall was living in the world of high concepts, of cosmic cycles, of Platonic ideals. He wasn't looking at the checkbook. He wasn't looking at the lock on the door. He trusted, because he believed that he was a teacher, and Fritz was a student. He didn't realize he was the prey. August 1990, the final act begins. Hall is weak. The juice fasts have left him malnourished. He's confused. Fritz has cut him off from the world entirely. On August 24th, 5 days before his death, Hall signs a final version of his will. It gives Daniel Fitz control. Complete control. Then, the silence sets in. For 3 days, no one sees Manly P. Hall. The neighbors don't see him in the garden. The staff of the PRS are told not to come to the house. What happened in those final 72 hours? We have to reconstruct it from the true crime scene. Imagine the heat. The air conditioning is off. The windows are cracked open. Hall is in his bedroom. He is too weak to walk. He is likely dehydrated. Fritz is there. We know this because Fritz was the one who eventually called the police. But he didn't call them immediately. The autopsy showed that Hall had been dead for quite some time before the 911 call was made. The purge fluid on his face had dried and crusted. The ants had established a colony on his body. Why wait? If you're a healer trying to save a man and he dies, you call an ambulance instantly. You try CPR. You probably panic. You don't wait for the body to rot. You don't wait for the ants. Unless you have work to do. Unless you need to empty the safe. Unless you need to sanitize the files. Unless you need to make sure the natural cause narrative holds up. When the police finally arrived, the scene was surreal. Hall was sitting in that chair, surrounded by the swarm. But there was something else, a detail that often gets left out of the sanitized biographies. There were thousands of dollars in cash stuffed into his pockets. Why? Was he trying to leave? Was he trying to buy his way out? Or was it a final insult? A symbol? Fritz told the police that Hall had died peacefully. He claimed that the ants were just a natural phenomenon due to the heat. He claimed that the purge fluid was normal. And the LAPD, overworked in dealing with a city on the edge of a gang war, bought it. They looked at the 89-year-old man and said, old age. They didn't look at the bruises, they didn't look at the financial records, they closed the case. But Hall's wife, Marie, didn't buy it. She returned from her treasure hunt and screamed murder. She demanded a second autopsy. She filed lawsuits. She accused Fritz of homicide. A second autopsy was performed, and this time, the medical examiner found something disturbing. There were signs of strangulation or suffocation. There were injuries to the neck. The hyoid bone, often broken in strangulation cases, was suspicious. But by then, the body had been embalmed. The evidence was degraded. The cause of death remained inconclusive. Daniel Fritz walked away. He took the money, he took the stamps, but he didn't get the legacy. The board of the Philosophical Research Society fought him in court. It was a messy, ugly battle that dragged on for years. Fritz eventually died of cancer a few years later, taking the truth of what happened in that room to his grave. So, the sage of Los Angeles, the man who wrote the book of The Secret Destiny, died a victim of a very common, very human crime: greed. Or was it? There's one more layer to this onion. One more theory about his death that connects back to the very beginning of his work. Manly P. Hall wrote extensively about the oath of silence. In the ancient mysteries, if you revealed the secrets to the profane, the uninitiated, the penalty was death. Hall had revealed more secrets than anyone in history. He had published the rituals. He had exposed the symbols. He had laid bare the blueprint of the great work. For 60 years, he was protected. He was useful. He was the PR agent. But in 1990, the Cold War was ending. The Soviet Union was collapsing. The New World Order that Hall had predicted in 1944 was finally coming online. George H.W. Bush was literally using the phrase New World Order in speeches that same year. The chrysalis was breaking. The philosophic empire was rising. Maybe Hall had outlived his usefulness. Maybe he knew too much about the next phase. Maybe he was starting to have regrets. There are rumors that in his final years, Hall was becoming disillusioned. He was seeing the rise of computer technology, the rise of corporate surveillance, and he was realizing that his utopia was turning into a dystopia. If the warning voice decides to scream fire in a crowded theater, the management has to remove him. Was Daniel Fritz just a grifter, or was he a cleaner? Was he sent to ensure that the old man didn't say the wrong thing at the wrong time? We will never know for sure. The file is closed, the body is gone, but the books remain, and the plan he described is unfolding right in front of our eyes. If you want to know what happens next, you don't need a crystal ball. You just need to read the last chapter of Hall's Secret Destiny, because we are not at the end of the story. We are just at the end of the beginning. The death of Manly P. Hall wasn't just the death of a man. It was the death of the gentle occult. It was the end of the era where you could study these things as a hobby. Now, we are in the era of application. The symbols aren't in books anymore. They are in algorithms. They're in architecture. They're in the laws. To understand how this applies to you right now in the 21st century, we have to look at the specific technology Hall warned us about. He didn't call it artificial intelligence, but he described it perfectly. He called it the universal mind. And this brings us to the most terrifying part of his philosophy, the idea that humanity is destined to merge into a single consciousness, the hive mind. Hall wrote that the ultimate goal of the great work was the elimination of the ego, the elimination of the self. He believed that individual identity was a temporary illusion, and that eventually we would all return to the one. In a spiritual sense, that sounds beautiful. It sounds like nirvana. It sounds like heaven. But in a political sense, in a technological sense, it sounds like the Borg. It sounds like a world where you have no privacy, no private thoughts, no private property, and no individual rights, because you are just a cell in the body of the state. Hall predicted that the philosophic empire would use advanced science to link the minds of the citizens, to create a social organism where everyone moves in unison. Look at social media. Look at how quickly a mob forms. Look at how quickly a consensus is manufactured. We are already linked. We are already processing information as a collective. We are losing the ability to think as individuals. The democratic chrysalis is dissolving. The global hive is forming. And the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to be a bee? Do you want to be a worker in the hive of the philosopher kings? Or do you want to be a free human being? Because that's the choice. That is the secret destiny. It isn't a destiny of freedom. It is a destiny of total integration. Manly P. Hall laid it all out. He didn't hide it. He put it in a book, charged $1 million for it, and the elite bought it. They read it, and they built it. Now, let's go back to the files. We've talked about the philosophy, we've talked about the death, but we haven't talked about the deep connections Hall had with the intelligence community. Because you don't run the world's largest private library of occult literature in Hollywood without attracting the attention of the spook. During World War II, the Philosophical Research Society wasn't just a library, it was a hub. There are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, that Hall was consulted by military intelligence regarding the psychology of the enemy. The Nazis were obsessed with the occult. Hitler, Himmler, the SS. They were steeped in Norse mythology, in black magic, and in ritual. The Allies needed someone who understood that language, someone who could think like a warlock. Who did they call? They called the Sage of Los Angeles. Hall understood the power of the swastika. He understood the ritual magic the Nazis were using to hypnotize the German people. He wrote essays on the black magic of the Third Reich. He helped the US government understand that they weren't fighting a political party, they were fighting a cult. But when the war ended, that relationship didn't stop. It mutated. The Nazis were defeated, but their scientists were brought to America. Operation Paperclip, Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist, the mind control expert. They all came to America. Where did they go? They went to the aerospace industry in Southern California, just a few miles away from Griffith Park. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Aerojet, the birth of the space age. And who was hanging out in that scene? Who was friends with the rocket scientist? Manly P. Hall. This is where the story connects to another infamous figure, Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was the founder of JPL. He was a genius chemist who invented the solid rocket fuel that eventually took us to the moon. But by night, Parsons was a high-ranking member of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the cult of Aleister Crowley. Parsons was performing sex magic rituals in the desert, trying to summon the Moonchild while building rockets for the US military. Manly P. Hall knew Parsons. They moved in the same circles. Hall was the light side of the coin, the scholar, the philosopher, and Parsons was the dark side, the practitioner and the magician. Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast, but this episode is brought to you by the Broken Truth merch. Support the show. Wear the truth. Official Broken Truth podcast merch is live now. Links in the description. And since you've made it this far in the episode, comment hashtag Broken Truth and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Because when you speak up, the algorithm listens. And so does the world. But they were both working on the same project, transcendence of humanity through technology and magic. Hall warned Parsons. He told him that he was playing with fire. He told him that summoning forces he didn't understand would lead to his destruction. He was right. Parsons blew himself up in a laboratory in 1952, another mysterious death, another genius consumed by the flame. But the influence remained. The connection between the occult and the space program is undeniable, and Hall was the bridge. He influenced the men who built the rockets. He influenced the men who walked on the moon. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, said that seeing the Earth from space changed his consciousness. He came back and founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to study psychic phenomena. He was a close friend of Hall. Why were astronauts so interested in Hall's work? Because they realized that going to space wasn't just a physical journey, it was a spiritual crossing. It was the ascension that the ancient Egyptians wrote about. The Great Pyramid was designed as a machine to launch the soul of the pharaoh into the stars. The Apollo program was the modern version of the Great Pyramid. Hall saw all of this. He saw the rockets as the externalization of the ancient desire to become gods. But he also saw the danger. He saw that we were sending primitive men into the cosmos. We were sending men with atomic bombs and nationalistic hatreds into the heavens. He wrote, "The spacing of the planets is less important than the spacing of the human heart." He knew that if we took our wars to the stars, we would contaminate the universe. This brings us back to the secret destiny. The ultimate goal isn't just a one-world government here on Earth. It is a cosmic civilization. Hall believed that America was chosen to lead humanity off the planet, to colonize the solar system, to fulfill the dream of the new Atlantis on a galactic scale. But to do that, we had to become one. We had to stop fighting. We had to dissolve the nations. And that is why the globalist agenda is so ruthless, because in their eyes, The survival of the species depends on it. They believe that if we stay divided, we will nuke ourselves into extinction. So they must force us to unite, even if they have to destroy our economies, our cultures, and our freedoms to do it. It is a benevolent tyranny, a prison built for our own protection. And Manly P. Hall was the architect who drew the bars. We have established that the secret destiny involves the unification of the world under a scientific priesthood. But to understand how they achieved this, how they convinced a world of Christians, Muslims, and free thinkers to slowly bow down to the altar of the state, we have to look at the engine of their philosophy. We have to talk about the sorcery of science. Manly P. Hall wrote a small explosive book in 1923. He was only 22 years old. It was titled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. If the Secret Teachings is the encyclopedia, The Lost Keys is the manifesto. It is short, poetic, and absolutely terrifying if you read it with a modern eye. In this book, Hall drops the mask. He stops talking about history and starts talking about energy. He writes a paragraph that has been circulated in conspiracy circles for 100 years. It is the smoking gun for anyone who believes the global elite are Luciferian. Let me read you the quote. I want you to listen to every word. Hall writes, when the Mason learns that the key to the warrior, on the block, is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy. The seething energies of Lucifer. He didn't say God. He didn't say Christ. He didn't say the architect. He said Lucifer. Now, before we grab the pitchforks, we have to understand what Hall meant by that. Because in the mystery schools, words are traps. They rarely mean what you think they mean. To the average Christian, Lucifer is Satan. He's the devil. He is the adversary who rebelled against God and was cast into hell. But to Manly P. Hall and the occult elite, Lucifer means something else entirely. The word comes from the Latin Lucifer meaning, light bringer. In Roman astronomy, it referred to the morning star, the planet Venus. In the Gnostic tradition that Hall subscribed to, the Luciferian energy is the energy of intellect. It is the fire of Prometheus. Prometheus was the Greek titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. For this crime, he was punished. But to the Greeks, he was a hero. He gave us civilization. He gave us technology. He gave us the ability to defy nature. Hall is arguing that the Mason, the builder of the new world, must master this Luciferian energy. He must master the intellect. He must master technology. And he must master the power to create and destroy. But here's the catch, the dangerous part. Hall admits that this energy is dangerous. He calls it seething. It is volatile. If you don't control it, it burns you alive. This is the perfect metaphor for the 20th and 21st centuries. We have mastered energies of Lucifer. We split the atom, nuclear power. We cracked the genome in biotech. We built the internet and artificial intelligence. We stole the fire. But did we have the wisdom to control it? Hall would argue that we didn't. He would argue that we gave Luciferian weapons to primitive men. We gave nuclear bombs to politicians who act like chimpanzees. And this is why the secret destiny requires a priesthood. Hall believed that you cannot allow the average person to wield this power. You cannot let the profane masses have access to the controls of the machine. Therefore, you must build a hierarchy. At the top, you have the initiates, the scientists, the technocrats, the philosopher kings, who understand the danger and control the energy. At the bottom, you have the masses, who are kept in the dark, distracted by entertainment, fed a watered-down version of reality, and used as labor to build the pyramid. This isn't just a philosophy. This is the structure of the modern world. Think about the trust the science mantra. Think about how we treat experts. In the Middle Ages, if you wanted to know the truth, you went to a priest. He read the Latin Bible, which you couldn't read, and he told you what God wanted. You couldn't question him because he had the secret knowledge. Today, if you want to know the truth, you go to a scientist. He reads the data, which you can't interpret, and he tells you what nature wants. You can't question him because he has the peer review. The white coat is the new robe, the lab is the new temple, and the peer review is the new canon law. Manly P. Hall predicted this shift. He called it the transition from the Piscean age, the age of faith and religion, to the Aquarian age, the age of knowledge and science. But he warned that if this new priesthood didn't have a moral compass, it would be infinitely worse than the old one. The Spanish Inquisition could burn your body. The technocratic Inquisition can reprogram your mind. Let's look deeper into the lost keys of Freemasonry. Hall discusses the concept of the Master Mason. To the public, a Mason is just a guy who drives a funny little car in a parade and raises money for burn hospitals. But Hall writes that the true Mason is not a member of the lodge. The true Mason is anyone who is actively building the temple of humanity. And what is the temple? It's the perfect state. Hall writes that the goal of the craft is to take the rough ashlar, the unpolished stone, representing the uneducated human, and turn it into the perfect ashlar, the polished cube, representing the enlightened citizen, so it can fit perfectly into the wall of the temple. Read that again. Fit perfectly into the wall. A stone in a wall has no freedom. It has no mobility. It has no individuality. Its only purpose is to hold up the structure. This is the collectivist nightmare. The secret destiny views you as a brick. If you are a jagged, unique, or individualistic brick, you don't fit in the wall. You compromise the structural integrity of the state. So you must be polished. How do they polish you? Through the education system, through media, through social pressure. They grind down your edges. They tell you that your rugged individualism is toxic. They tell you that your nationalism is racist. They tell you that your religious faith is superstition. They are hammering you into a perfect ashlar so you can be slotted into the global hive. Manly P. Hall laid out the pedagogy for this. He criticized the education system of his time, saying it was too focused on facts and not enough on synthesis. But the system that replaced it, the modern Prussian-style education system, is designed specifically to create workers, not thinkers. Hall wanted to create philosophers, but the people who read Hall, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the men who funded the transformation of the American school system, they didn't want philosophers. They wanted bricks. They took Hall's idea of the perfect state and stripped away the spiritual liberation, leaving only the social control. They kept the Luciferian technology, but they discarded the Christ consciousness that Hall said was necessary to balance it. And this brings us to the most dangerous aspect of Hall's work, the fusion of state and religion. The founding fathers of America, men like Jefferson and Madison, were terrified of theocracy. They built a wall of separation between church and state, but Hall argues that this separation is temporary. In The Secret Destiny, he writes, the state will become the embodiment of the divine will. He predicts a future where the government is the religion, where obeying the law is a spiritual act, where paying taxes is an offering, where dissent is blasphemy. We are seeing this happen in real time. Look at the fervor around political ideologies today. Politics has replaced religion for millions of people. Your political party is your tribe. Your candidate is your messiah. Your policy platform is your creed. If you violate the speech codes of the modern state, you are excommunicated. You're canceled. You're cast out into the outer darkness. This is religious behavior. It is the behavior of a cult. And it fits perfectly with the philosophical empire Hall described. A world where the state manages not just the roads and the bridges, but the moral soul of the citizen. But Hall didn't stop at the state. He went into the psychology of the individual. He wrote extensively about the subconscious mind. He knew, long before modern neuroscience, the human beings are run by their programming. We think we are making free choices, but 95% of what we do is automatic. It's driven by symbols, trauma, and habits stored in the subconscious. Hall taught that the magician, or the leader, creates change by bypassing the conscious mind and speaking directly to the subconscious. How do you do that? Through symbols, through rituals, and through repetition. Think about the Great Seal on the dollar bill again. You look at it every day. You don't think about it, but your subconscious sees it. It sees the pyramid. It sees the eye. It registers the message: hierarchy, surveillance, authority, and destiny. It creates a subtle background frequency of submission. Hall wrote, symbolism is the language of the mysteries. By symbols, men have ever sought to communicate to each other those thoughts which transcend the limitations of language. But symbols are also used to hide truth. Hall explains that every great symbol has two meanings: the false meaning for the masses, and the true meaning for the initiates. Let's take the Statue of Liberty. To the American public, she is Lady Liberty. She represents freedom, immigrants, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. But to the occultist, the French Freemasons who built her and shipped her to New York. She is Semiramis. She is Isis. She is Columbia. She is the goddess of reason and illumination. Notice the torch. She is the light bearer. Here we see Lucifer again. Notice the rays coming off her head. They are solar rays. She is not a symbol of political freedom. She is a symbol of intellectual illumination. She represents the Gnostic freedom from the darkness of ignorance and traditional religion. She stands in the harbor of New York, the financial capital of the world, holding the torch of Prometheus. Hall knew this. He wrote about the secret history of America's monuments. He knew that Washington, D.C. was laid out as a giant Masonic talisman. The Washington Monument is an obelisk, an Egyptian phallic symbol representing the power of the god Osiris. The Capitol building is a temple. The layout of the streets forms pentagrams and compasses. Why? Is it just for decoration? Or is Washington, D.C. a machine? Hall would argue that the city itself is a talisman, designed to focus the will of the nation. It is a circuit board, and the politicians are just the electrons flowing through it. If you accept Hall's premise that symbols have power, then you have to accept that we are living inside a magical working. The United States government is the largest occult ritual in history, and Manly P. Hall wrote the program notes. But let's pivot back to the man himself, because while he was decoding the world for the elite, his own life was becoming a tragedy of errors. We talked about his death, but we skipped over his marriage. Manly P. Hall was married twice. His first marriage was short. His second marriage, to Marie Bauer, was complicated. Marie Bauer Hall was not a shrinking violet. She was a firebrand. She was convinced, absolutely convinced, that she had cracked the code of the Bruton Vault. In the 1930s and 40s, the Halls spent a fortune trying to dig up Williamsburg, Virginia. Imagine the scene. The most famous philosopher in Los Angeles and his wife sneaking around colonial graveyards at night with shovels, looking for the lost manuscripts of Francis Bacon. They believed that if they found the vault, it would prove that Bacon wrote Shakespeare and founded America. It would shatter the conventional history. It would trigger the new age. They found nothing, or at least, nothing they were allowed to keep. The Rockefeller Foundation, which funded the restoration of colonial Williamsburg, shut them down. They filled in the holes. They concreted over the site. Why? Did the Rockefellers know what was down there? Hall believed they did. He believed that the High Cabal had already looted the vault, or that they were guarding it until the proper time. This failure haunted Marie for the rest of her life. It drove a wedge between her and Manly. He retreated into his library. She retreated into her obsession. And this emotional distance is what allowed the wolf, Daniel Fritz, to enter the fold decades later. It is a reminder that even the great initiates are human. They have bad marriages, they have failed projects, and they have blind spots. But Hall's blind spots didn't stop his influence from spreading. In fact, his influence exploded in the 1960s and 70s. The counterculture, the hippies, the New Age movement. We tend to think of the 1960s as a rebellion against the establishment. But who were the hippies reading? They were reading the secret teachings of all ages. They were reading Hall's books on Buddhism and mysticism. Hall was the grandfather of the New Age movement. He taught the baby boomers about vibration, karma, reincarnation, and Aquarian consciousness. But remember what we said earlier. Hall was the PR agent. Was the counterculture a genuine rebellion? Or was it the soft disclosure? Was the Age of Aquarius, the song from the musical Hair, a pop culture ritual to prepare the youth for the shift away from Christianity? Hall lectured extensively during this time. He warned the hippies about drugs. He hated LSD. He hated Timothy Leary. He said, "Wisdom is not found in a pill. You cannot storm the gates of heaven with chemicals." He was a disciplined occultist. He believed in hard work, study, and character building. He looked at the hippies and saw a mess. He saw exoteric chaos, not esoteric order. But he had let the genie out of the bottle. He had popularized the very ideas that were now tearing society apart. He was the sorcerer's apprentice. He had started the broomsticks carrying the water, but he couldn't stop them. This brings us to the most modern application of his work, the concept of the simulacrum. Hall wrote about the false light, the idea that there is a true spiritual illumination, but there is also a counterfeit. The counterfeit looks like light, it feels like light, but it is cold, it's artificial. We are living in the age of the false light. Screens, virtual reality, and deep fakes. We are building a digital copy of the universe, a metaverse. In Gnostic theology, which Hall studied deeply, the physical world is considered a prison created by a false god, the demiurge. The goal of the Gnostic is to escape the prison and return to the true spiritual realm. But what happens if we build a new prison inside the old one? What if the new Atlantis isn't a physical country? What if it's a digital server? What if the philosophic empire is a simulation where the technocratics are literally the gods? They control the physics, they control the economy, and they control your avatar. This fits Hall's definition of black magic perfectly: the use of spiritual power, creativity, and code to entrap the soul in a material digital matrix. Hall would likely look at the metaverse with horror. Or would he? Would he see it as the ultimate alchemical transmutation? The ability for man to finally become the creator. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands. If you can build a world, you are a god. And that is the ultimate seduction. That is the apple in the Garden of Eden. Ye shall be as gods. Manly P. Hall spent his life explaining how the serpent gave us that apple. He traced the bite marks through history, from Egypt to Greece to Rome to London to Washington, D.C. And now, the venom is in our veins. We are hallucinating. We are seeing a world that isn't there. We are fighting wars over symbols. We are worshiping science that we don't understand. We are the rough ashlars, being ground down by the machine. But is there a way out? Did Hall leave a key in the back of the book? He did. But it's not the key to the elite universe. It's the key they tried to bury. The key is individual responsibility. For all his talk of the world state, Hall was a fierce advocate for the individual philosopher. He believed that the only way to avoid tyranny was for the individual to become stronger than the state, to become a self-ruler. If you govern yourself, you don't need a king. If you master your own emotions, you don't need a nanny state to tell you what to say. If you connect directly to the divine, you don't need a priest or a scientist to mediate for you. This is the dangerous part of his teaching, the part that the New World Order ignores. They want the pyramid, but they don't want the philosopher. They want the power, but they don't want the wisdom. And that is why the structure is unstable. That is why the new Atlantis is cracking before it's even finished. Because you cannot build a perfect state out of an imperfect temple, and you certainly cannot build a free world out of slaves. In the next section, we're going to dive into the specific prophecies Hall made about the collapse of the American economy and the Great Reset. Yes, he predicted the debt crisis. He predicted the banking collapse. He told us that the false prosperity of the 20th century was an illusion designed to enslave us to debt. And he told us exactly how the debt would be called in. We have looked at the temple. We have looked at the laboratory. Now, we must look at the bank. Because you cannot build a new world order without funding it. And you cannot enslave a free people unless you first enslave their wallets. Manly P. Hall was not an economist in the traditional sense. He didn't look at supply and demand graphs. He didn't care about the GDP. He looked at money through the lens of occult law. He looked at karmic economics. And what he saw coming for America was not a recession, it was a judgment. In the 1940s and 50s, while America was booming, while the suburbs were expanding and everyone was buying a Chevrolet and a television, Hall was sounding the alarm. He gave a series of lectures on false prosperity. He argued that the American dream had been hijacked by a commercial spirit that was fundamentally at war with the human soul. He said, "We have traded our birthright for a mess of pottage." He warned that we were building a civilization based on acquisition rather than illumination. And in the laws of the mystery schools, anything built on greed is destined to collapse. It isn't a matter of if, but when. Paul taught that debt is a spiritual chain. When an individual goes into debt, they mortgage their future, they give up their freedom in the present to pay for a pleasure they haven't earned. But when a nation goes into a debt, when a nation prints money out of thin air to fund wars and luxuries, that is a violation of cosmic law. It's a form of black magic. It is the creation of value from nothing, an illusion that must eventually be shattered. He predicted that the paper economy would inevitably implode. He saw the Federal Reserve not as a bank, but as a temple of usury, a structure designed to siphon the wealth of the common man up to the philosopher kings, or in this case, the merchant princes. This brings us to the modern concept of the Great Reset. You hear this phrase everywhere now. The World Economic Forum, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the idea that we need to reset capitalism. Conspiracy theorists scream that this is a communist takeover, but if you read Manly P. Hall, you realize it is actually a technocratic consolidation. Hall wrote that in the philosophic empire, private property would be viewed differently. He believed that the obsession with my stuff was a sign of spiritual immaturity. In the New Atlantis, resources are managed by the state for the good of the collective. Does that sound familiar? You will own nothing and you will be happy. The slogan is pure occultism. It is the idea of the aesthetic. It is the idea of the ascetic, the monk who owns nothing but is happy because he is close to God. But the Great Reset twists this. It demands that you play the role of the monk, while the elite play the role of the god who owns the monastery. Paul warned that this shift would happen during a time of great crisis. Orbo ab chao, order out of chaos. He explained that the secret destiny requires the periodic destruction of the economic system. Why? Because wealth makes people independent. If a man owns his land, produces his own food, and has gold in his safe, he doesn't need the state. He is unmanageable. If you crash the economy, if you create hyperinflation, if you wipe out small businesses, then the man is hungry. He is desperate. And a desperate man will trade his liberty for a sandwich. He will trade his vote for a stimulus check. Paul saw the economic crash not as a failure of the system, but as a shearing of the sheep. It is a ritual harvest. The wealth is not destroyed, it is transferred. It moves from the hands of the many to the hands of the few. And this transfer creates the pyramid structure we see on the dollar bill, a massive, impoverished base supporting a tiny floating capstone of unimaginable power. But Hall went deeper than just the mechanics of the crash. He analyzed the psychology of materialism. He argued that the greatest trick the dark magicians ever pulled was convincing us that the material world is all that matters. Commercialism, he wrote, is the murder of the soul. By focusing our entire lives on buying the next iPhone, the bigger car, the nicer house, we have atrophied our spiritual organs. We have forgotten how to think metaphysically. We have forgotten how to recognize evil. We have become sensory creatures, reacting only to pleasure and pain. This makes us easy to control. If you want to control a dog, use a treat and a stick. If you want to control a materialist human, you use consumer goods and economic fear. Paul warned that this softening of the American character was intentional. A population of philosophers cannot be enslaved. A population of consumers enslaves itself. He wrote, "The democratic state cannot survive the loss of the democratic spirit," meaning the institutions of freedom, Congress, the courts, the vote, are useless if the people inhabiting them are slaves to their own desires. And this is where we are today. We have the buildings of a republic, the soul of an empire. Hall predicted that as the economy collapses, the people would cry out for a dictator. This is a classic concept from Plato, whom Hall worshipped. Plato taught that democracy inevitably degenerates into tyranny. Why? Because the mob becomes addicted to freedom without responsibility. They vote themselves money from the treasury. The society descends into chaos. And then, a strong man appears. He promises to restore order. He promises to fix the economy. He promises to punish the thieves. And the people cheer. They open the gates. They hand him the crown. Paul saw this cycle repeating through history. Rome, France, Germany. And he saw it coming for America. But he believed that in the secret destiny, this dictator would not be a man in a military uniform. It would be a system, a scientific dictatorship. A system where the strong man is an algorithm, where the order is maintained not by soldiers on the street, but by digital credits and social scores. It is a cleaner, more efficient tyranny. It is a tyranny that you can't shoot at because it lives in the cloud. Paul's economic prophecies are terrifying because they are coming true. The debt is unsustainable. The false prosperity is evaporating. The middle class is being hollowed out. But he also offered a solution, and it's a solution that no one wants to hear. Karmic responsibility. Paul taught that the only way to escape the trap is to stop playing the game, to stop buying things you don't need, to get out of debt, to detach your happiness from your possessions. He preached a return to simplicity. He said, "The wise man is he who carries his wealth within him." If your wealth is knowledge, your character, and your connection to the divine, then a stock market crash cannot bankrupt you. A currency reset cannot impoverish you. You become anti-fragile. But how many Americans are ready to do that? How many are ready to give up the American dream of endless consumption to find the secret destiny of spiritual awakening? Unfortunately, it's very few. And that is why the crash will be so devastating, because we are psychologically unprepared for it. Now, let's pivot from the economy to the culture, because the war for the mind isn't just about money, it's about identity. Manly P. Hall wrote extensively about psychological warfare, though he called it mental alchemy. He understood that if you want to change a society, you have to change its myths. You have to change the stories it tells itself about who it is. For 200 years, the American myth was one of rugged individualism, Christian morality, and the pioneer spirit. But Hall knew that for the new Atlantis to rise, this old myth had to die. Why? Because a Christian individualist is not a good subject for a global technocracy. He answers to God, not the state. He values his family above the collective. So the engineers had to deconstruct the American identity. Hall didn't advocate for this destruction necessarily, but he described the process, the transmutation of a culture. You start by attacking the roots. You rewrite the history. You cast the founders not as heroes, but as villains. You cast their traditions not as wisdom, but as oppression. You create a rootless generation. A person with no roots is easily moved. If you don't know where you came from, you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, the state can tell you who to be. We see this today in the crisis of meaning. People are lost. They have abandoned the religion of their parents. They have been taught to hate their own history. They are floating in a void. And what rushes in to fill that void? Identity, politics, gender ideology, and radical activism. These are synthetic religions. They are offering a sense of belonging. They offer a devil to fight, patriarchy, capitalism, and so on. They offer a ritual through protest and cancellation, but they are designed to divide. All warn that division is the weapon of the tyrant. Divide and conquer, it's the oldest trick in the book, but the modern version is divide and distract. Keep the races fighting each other, keep the genders fighting each other, keep the generations fighting each other. As long as the rough ashlars are smashing against each other, they will never look up and see the Masons building the wall around them. Hall's work on social psychology anticipated the polarization we see today. He knew that an emotionalized population cannot think rationally. He wrote, "When the emotions are aroused, the intellect is asleep, and the media machine is designed to keep us in a constant state of emotional arousal, fear, anger, outrage, and dopamine. It is a psychic battery harvesting our energy to power the system. There is an even darker layer to this cultural alchemy, and it involves the concept of the androgyny. In The Secret Teachings, Hall discusses the divine hermaphrodite, the rebus. In alchemical symbolism, the ultimate state of perfection is the union of opposites, male and female combined into one being. To the alchemist, this is a spiritual state, the balance of masculine and feminine energies within the soul. But to the social engineer, to the people applying these ideas to the masses, it becomes the blurring of biological reality. We are seeing a massive push to erase the distinctions between male and female. Why? Is it just about civil rights? Or is it about the alchemical transformation of humanity? If you can convince a population that biology is not real, that male and female are just social constructs, then you have broken their connection to physical reality completely. You have proven that you can program them to believe anything. If you can make them deny the evidence of their own eyes, you own them. Hall didn't predict the modern gender theory explicitly, but he provided the metaphysical framework that the elites are using to justify it. The goal is the creation of a new human, a being that is detached from nature, detached from tradition, and fully malleable by the state. The post-human. This links back to transhumanism. If you don't have a fixed gender, if you don't have a fixed soul, then why upgrade your body with a chip? Why not upload your mind to the cloud? Why not become a machine? The erasure of biological identity is the prerequisite for the merger with the machine. You have to destroy the old Adam to build the Robocop. Manly P. Hall spent his life studying the mysteries of the blood. He believed that the blood contained the record of the soul. He would likely be horrified by the modern attempt to sterilize humanity, to alter our DNA, to turn us into GMO products. He wrote, "The blood is the vehicle of the ego. If you corrupt the blood, you evict the ego. You evict the soul. And what is left? A biological shell, a non-player character, a drone. This is the secret destiny gone wrong. Or Is it the secret destiny gone right? Remember, the phoenix must burn. Humanity must be destroyed in its current form in order to be reborn. Maybe the post human future, the Borg hive mind, is the phoenix rising. Maybe that was the plan all along, to create a species that is no longer human in the way we understand it. A species that is efficient, obedient, and immortal, but soulless. The technological similarity is just the modern name for the alchemical great work. They are trying to build God out of silicone, and Manly P. Hall gave them the instruction manual. In the next section, we're going to look at the geopolitical chessboard. Hall wrote about the East versus West dynamic. He predicted the rise of Asia. He predicted that the center of the world would shift from the Atlantic to the Pacific. He knew that the American experiment was just one phase, and he knew that the torch was destined to be passed. Is China the new model for the philosophic empire? Is the social credit system in Beijing the realization of Hall's new Atlantis? We are going to open the map. We are going to look at the ley lines of power, and we're going to see why the decline of America is not an accident. It's a controlled demolition to clear the site for the next empire. We have looked at the collapse of the American economy. We have looked at the collapse of the American identity. Now, we have to zoom out. We have to look at the map of the world, because the great work is not a national project, it's a global one. And if you read the tea leaves of Manly P. Hall's philosophy, you start to realize a terrifying truth. America was never the final destination. America was just the construction site. And now that the building is nearing completion, the construction crew is being fired. Hall was unique among Western occultists because he didn't look solely to Egypt or Greece for wisdom. He looked east, he traveled to Japan, he studied Chinese philosophy, he wrote extensively about Buddhism and Taoism. He believed that the world operates on a pendulum. For 2,000 years, the pendulum has swung west. Rome, London, New York, the era of the Atlantic powers, the era of individualism, materialism, and technology. But Hall predicted the pendulum would swing back. The cycle of the West is ending. The cycle of the East is beginning. He wrote that the Pacific Ocean would become the center of the world stage. If you look at the 21st century, what do you see? The rise of Asia, the decline of Europe and America. But this isn't just economics, it's design. Hall argued that the Western mind had perfected the manipulation of matter, but it had lost the understanding of the spirit. The Eastern mind had preserved the understanding of the collective spirit, but lacked the technology. The secret destiny is the synthesis of these two, the merger of Western tech and Eastern collectivism. And where do you see that synthesis happening right now? China. Look at the Chinese model of government. It's not a democracy, it's a technocratic meritocracy. It is run by engineers and scientists. It uses advanced AI to manage the population. It uses a social credit system to enforce moral behavior. It is the closest thing on earth to Bacon's Solomon's House. In the West, we view Chinese surveillance state as a dystopian nightmare, but to a certain type of philosopher king, the type Hall described, it looks like efficiency. It looks like order. In China, the individual is nothing. The state is everything. The hive is functioning perfectly. Is it possible the new Atlantis has moved? Is it possible that the torch of illumination has been taken from the Statue of Liberty and handed to the dragon? Hall didn't explicitly say China will rule the world, but he did say that the West was spiritually bankrupt. He linked Western civilization to a body that had grown too large for its soul. It was a Frankenstein monster, all muscle and no conscience. He believed that for the world to survive, the aggressive energy of the West had to be tamed by the passive wisdom of the East. But what does that taming look like in practice? It looks like the deindustrialization of America. It looks like the transfer of our manufacturing base to Asia. It looks like the transfer of our intellectual property. We have spent the last 40 years dismantling the American engine and shipping the parts across the Pacific. Was that just corporate greed, or is it geopolitical alchemy? If you're building a global government, you cannot have one nation that is too powerful. A superpower is an obstacle to a world state. You need balance. You need to bring the high down and the low up until everyone is equal, equally dependent on the system. The controlled demolition of the United States is necessary to create this equilibrium. Hall wrote that the destruction is the preserver of the pattern. Sometimes you have to burn the forest to save the ecosystem. The United States is the old growth forest. It is being burned so the global saplings can grow. This is a hard pill to swallow, We want to believe we are the heroes of the story, but in the eyes of the secret history, nations are just tools. When a tool becomes dull, you discard it. The United States was the tool used to build the atomic bomb, the computer, and the internet. We did our job. We unlocked the Luciferian energy. Now, the managers are moving the headquarters. But there is a spiritual dimension to this East versus West conflict that Hall was obsessed with. He called it the schizophrenia of the West. He argued that Western man is mentally ill because he is divided against himself. He goes to church on Sunday and hears blessed are the poor, and then goes to work on Monday and hears greed is good. This internal conflict creates a neurosis. We are anxious, we are depressed, we are medicated. The Eastern mind traditionally does not have this split. The spiritual and secular are woven together. Hall believed that the Universal Reformation required healing this split, but the modern solution, the globalist solution, isn't to make the West more spiritual. It's to remove the religion entirely. If you remove the Sunday part of the equation, the conflict disappears. If you remove the conscience, the worker drone is no longer anxious. He's just productive. This brings us to the role of the world teacher. In Theosophy and the works of Alice Bailey, which parallel Hall's work, there's a constant reference to the coming one, Maitreya, the world teacher who will unite the East and the West. Hall was careful. He didn't prophesy a specific messiah figure in the way a cult leader would, but he spoke of an avatar of synthesis. He believed that a new philosophical system would emerge that would combine science, religion, and philosophy into one. This new system would be the religion of the New World Order. And it wouldn't look like Christianity. It wouldn't look like Buddhism. It would look like data. The omniscience of God is replaced by the omniscience of the cloud. The omnipresence of the Spirit is replaced by the omnipresence of the sensor grid. We are building a digital God to rule a digital earth. But here is the flaw in the plan that Hall himself hinted at in his later, more pessimistic years. You cannot synthesize life. You can build a perfect mechanical bird, but it will never lay an egg. You can build a perfect mechanical state, but it will never have a soul. The China model, the technocratic dream, is sterile. It's a machine. It can execute commands, but it cannot create. It cannot dream. And without the chaos of freedom, without the messiness of the individual, evolution stops. If the globalists succeed in creating their new Atlantis, they will have built a tomb, a shiny, high-tech, perfectly efficient tomb. And Manly P. Hall, in his quiet moments in the library, seemed to know this. There are stories of him sitting in the garden at the PRS, watching the fish in the pond, looking tired, looking like a man who had read every book in the world and found them all lacking. He wrote, "The end of all learning is to know God. Not to be God, to know God. There's a difference. The Luciferian trap is to desire to be God. The Christ consciousness, as Hall defined it, is the surrender to the will of God." The elite who used Hall's work chose the Luciferian path. They chose power over wisdom, and now we are all trapped in their experiment. But what if the experiment fails? What if the human spirit is stronger than the programming? Hall wrote that the mystery of the human soul is the one variable that managers can never fully calculate. They can predict our spending, they can predict our voting, but they cannot predict the moment when a man stands up and says, "No." That spark, that divine spark, is the wild card. And as we move into the final act, we have to talk about that spark. We have to talk about the secret destiny of the individual. Because while Hall wrote a blueprint for the state, he also wrote a lifeboat for the soul. He left a map for the escape route. It involves a concept called the philosophical life. It is not for everyone. It is not for the masses. It is for the few who are willing to unplug from the matrix. In the next section, we're going to open up this emergency exit. We're going to talk about Hall's practical teachings on how to survive the collapse, how to build an inner sanctuary that the state cannot touch. And we're going to discuss the final, most controversial theory of all, that the New World Order is not the end of the story. It is just the dark night of the soul before the real dawn. That the tyranny is necessary to wake us up. That we are being squeezed so that we wake up from our coma of materialism. Is the deep state actually the devil working for God? Is the villain actually the catalyst for the hero's journey? Manly P. Hall thought so. We have spent hours walking through the darkness. We have mapped the prison. We have identified the jailers. We have read the blueprints of the cage they are building around the human mind. But if we end the story there, we have failed. If we leave you with nothing but fear and paranoia, we are no better than the system we are criticizing. Fear is their currency. We cannot pay them with their own coin. Manly P. Hall wrote thousands of pages about the conspiracy of the state. Yes, but he wrote millions of words about the liberation of the soul. He left a map for the escape route. And the most subversive, dangerous secret he ever revealed is this: the exit door is unlocked. It has always been unlocked. You just have to be willing to walk through it. The escape route is not political. You cannot vote your way out of the new Atlantis. You cannot shoot your way out. You cannot protest your way out. The escape route is internal. Paul thought that the ultimate goal of the secret destiny wasn't just to build a perfect world government that was the corrupted version. The true goal was to build the inner sanctuary. He wrote, "Security is not a condition of the environment. It is a condition of the consciousness." Think about that. We spend our entire lives trying to fix the environment. We want more money, better laws, safer streets, and nicer leaders. We think that if we fix the outside, we will be safe on the inside. Paul says this is backwards. This is the illusion. The world is designed to be chaotic. The world is a school, and a school is full of tests. If you're waiting for the world to stop being crazy before you find peace, you will wait forever. The philosophical life is the art of building a fortress in your own mind that the state cannot breach. How do you do that? Paul outlines a specific curriculum. It starts with the discipline of the mind. He argued the average person has no control over their thoughts. We are like a radio that picks up every signal in the air. If the news says be afraid, we're afraid. If the advertisement says want this, we want it. We're just puppets. To be free, you must cut the strings. You must learn to filter the signal. Paul taught the practice of creative ignorance. This means deliberately ignoring information that is irrelevant to your spiritual growth. It means turning off the TV. It means ignoring the outrage of the day. It is an act of rebellion to say, I do not care what the politicians are doing. I do not care what the celebrities are wearing. I am tending my own garden. When you withdraw your attention from the system, you starve it. The system runs on your attention. It runs on your emotional engagement. But when you become indifferent to its circus, you become invisible to its control. But its indifference is not enough. You must replace the noise with truth. Paul believed in the power of the great books. He told his students to read Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu. Why? Because these men were free. They lived in times of tyranny, Nero, Caesar, the warring states, but they were untouched by it. When you read their words, you tune your mind to their frequency. You vibrate at the level of the immortals, rather than the level of the morning news. This builds the mental body. It creates a shield. Paul wrote, "The wise man lives in a world of his own making, projected from himself into the sphere of his environment." This sounds like fantasy, but it is actually the ultimate psychological defense. If you carry your own values, your own truth, and your own peace within you, then it doesn't matter if you're in a palace or a prison, you are free. This brings us to the most controversial aspect of Hall's philosophy, the spiritual purpose of the New World Order. We tend to look at the globalist elite, the bankers, the technocrats, the surveillance state, as the villains, as evil. And on a human level, they are. They're suffering. They destroy freedom. But on a cosmic level, Hall hints at a terrifying possibility. What if they're necessary? What if the tyranny is the shadow that forces the light to wake up? In alchemy, you cannot have gold without first having the negrito, the blackening, the rotting, the decomposition. Humanity has been asleep. We have been comfortable in our materialism. We have been lazy in our spirituality. We have taken our freedom for granted. Maybe we need the threat of total slavery to remind us of the value of liberty. Maybe we need the artificial intelligence to threaten our humanity, so we finally ask, what does it mean to be human? Paul suggests that the dark forces are actually the weights in the cosmic gym. They provide the resistance against which the soul builds its muscle. If the world was easy, we would remain spiritual infants. Technocratic Atlantis is the final exam. It is the ultimate test of the human spirit. Can you maintain your humanity in a world of machines? Can you maintain your faith in a world of data? Can you maintain your love in a world of fear? If you can, you graduate. You become the philosopher king of your own life. If you can't, you get recycled. You become a brick in the wall. This perspective shifts from the narrative of victimhood to warriorhood. You are not a victim of the conspiracy. You are a challenger in the arena. The conspiracy is just the obstacle course. And Manly P. Hall gave us the cheat codes. He taught the importance of the vow. In the ancient mysteries, the initiate took a vow of silence and service. In the modern world, your vow is your integrity. Hall wrote that integrity is the only armor that cannot be pierced. If you lie, you create a crack in your armor. If you cheat, you create a crack. If you compromise your values for money and safety, you create a crack. And through those cracks, the fear enters. Through those cracks, the programming enters. But if you live with absolute integrity, if you speak the truth, keep your word, and act according to your conscience, you become whole. You become a monolith. The state cannot manipulate a man who wants nothing from it. If you don't want their money, they can't bribe you. If you don't fear their prisons, because you know the body is just a garment, they can't threaten you. If you don't crave their approval, they can't shame you. This is the state of the sovereign. And this is what the secret destiny was originally supposed to produce. Not a nation of sheep ruled by wolves, but a nation of lions. All believed that America was designed to be the factory of lions. Somewhere along the way, the factory was hijacked. The managers decided they preferred sheep. Sheep are easier to manage. Sheep don't ask questions. But the machinery is still there. The constitution of the soul is still written in the ether. You can trigger the original program whenever you want. Paul's final advice to his students was simple. Do the work. Don't just read the books. Don't just listen to the podcasts, but do the work. Meditate. Purify your body. Sharpen your mind. Serve your neighbor. He believed in the law of service. He taught that you cannot be free if you are selfish. The only way to liberate yourself is to help liberate others. Not by preaching to them, not by arguing with them on Facebook, but by being an example. By being the calmest person in the room when everyone else is panicking. By being the kindest person in the room when everyone else is hating. By being the most rational person in the room when everyone else is hallucinating. When you do that, you become a lighthouse. And in the coming storm, the world is going to need lighthouses more than it needs politicians. We are entering the dark night of the planetary soul. The systems are failing, the old narratives are dying, the shadows are getting longer. But remember, the symbol of the phoenix. The fire is not the end, the fire is the beginning. The bird must burn so the chick can rise. The American empire must fall so the American spirit can be reborn. Manly P. Hall saw this coming 80 years ago. He sat in his library in Griffith Park, surrounded by wisdom of the ages, and he wrote it all down. He tried to warn the politicians. They used his symbols, but ignored his ethics. He tried to warn the scientists. They took his curiosity, but ignored his caution. He tried to warn the people. They bought his books, but put them on the shelf as decoration. Now, the bill is coming due. But it's not too late for you. The secret destiny is not written in stone. It's written in choices. The elite have made their choice. They have chosen the hive. They have chosen the machine, and they have chosen control. Now you have to make yours. Will you be a brick, or will you be a builder? In the final section, we're going to summarize the entire investigation. We're going to connect the dots from the ancient mysteries to the modern surveillance state one last time. And I'm going to give you the action plan, a specific list of things you can do, starting tomorrow, to unplug from the matrix and reclaim your mind. Because the broken truth isn't about knowing what's wrong. It's about knowing how to make it right. We have arrived at the end of the labyrinth. We started with a body covered in ants in a mansion in Los Angeles. We traveled back to the secret vaults of the Vatican, the court of Elizabeth, the lodge rooms of the Founding Fathers, and the rocket labs of the space age. We have pulled apart the official story of Manly P. Hall and found a machine underneath. A machine designed to transform the world. So what is the verdict? After 20,000 words of investigation, who was Manly Palmer Hall? Was he the villain? Was he the dark wizard who handed the keys of the kingdom to a technocratic elite? Or was he the hero? Was he the desperate librarian trying to teach a class of unruly children before they burned down the school? The answer, as Hall himself would say, is found in the synthesis of opposites. He was both. He was the Prometheus of the 20th century. He loved humanity enough to steal the fire from the gods and give it to us. He gave us the secret teachings. He gave us the map of the secret destiny. He told us exactly how the universe works, how the mind works, and how the state works. But like Prometheus, he was punished for it. He spent his final years watching the fire he stole being used to burn down the things he loved. He watched the wisdom of the ancients being twisted into the psychological warfare of the moderns. He watched the philosophic empire turn into the surveillance state. And in the end, he died alone, silenced by the very greed he warned against. But the tragedy of the messenger does not invalidate the message. The secret destiny of America is real. It is happening. The plan to dissolve the republic and replace it with global technocracy is not a theory. It is a historical fact, documented in Hall's own hand, and executed by the men who read his books. The new Atlantis is rising, but here's the twist. Here's the broken truth they don't want you to know. The new Atlantis cannot work without your consent. The entire system, the pyramid, the eye, the economy, the media, it all runs on energy, and that energy comes from you. It comes from your fear, your attention, your compliance. They're building a machine that runs on human souls. If you withdraw your soul, the machine stops. So, how do we do that? We promised you an action plan. We promised you the emergency exit. If you want to survive the transition, if you want to be the phoenix that rises rather than the ash that falls, here's the curriculum for the modern initiate. Step 1, the information fast. Manly P. Hall taught that the mind becomes what it consumes. If you eat garbage, your body gets sick. If you eat propaganda, your mind gets sick. The modern media is a spell. It's designed to keep you in a lower state of vibration, fear, anger, and lust. You must break the spell. Stop watching the news. I mean, turn it off. Delete the apps that make you angry. Unfollow the accounts that thrive on conflict. Reclaim your mental state. Replace the noise with the great books. Read Hall, read Jung, read the Stoics, read the Bible, and read history. When you fill your mind with eternal truths, the temporary lies of the politicians stop working on you. You become immune to their gaslighting. Step 2, the return to the analog. The technocratic control grid lives on the digital realm. The metaverse is a trap. The resistance is physical. Get your hands in the dirt, grow something, build something, fix something. Hall believed that contact with nature was essential for spiritual health. Nature never lies. The seasons never lie. The soil never lies. When you connect with the physical world, you ground yourself. You become harder to simulate. You become harder to manipulate. Build real world communities. Solomon's house starts at your dinner table. Invite people over, talk face to face, turn off the phones. The human connection is the only thing the AI cannot replace. It's the holy grail, so guard it. Step 3, the decoupling. Hall warned about false prosperity. The debt system is the chain. Do whatever you can to loosen that chain. Get out of debt, stop buying things you don't need to impress people you don't like. Detach your identity from your consumer status. If you don't need the latest gadget, they can't bribe you. If you don't need their approval, they can't blackmail you. Become anti-fragile. Learn skills that are useful in a collapse. Learn to cook, learn to mend, learn to heal. The philosopher king is not just a thinker, he's a doer, he's self-reliant. Step 4, the inner sanctuary. This is the most important step. You must build a temple inside yourself. You need a daily practice, meditation, prayer, and contemplation. You need a place inside your own mind where the state is not allowed to enter, a place of absolute silence and absolute peace. This is where you find your sovereignty. Globalists want to merge you into the hive mind. They want to erase the boundaries of your ego. Your defense is to strengthen your connection to the divine. When you know, deep in your bones, that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, the fear of death vanishes. And when the fear of death vanishes, the tyrant loses his only weapon. They can take your money, they can take your freedom, they can even take your body, but they cannot take your soul unless you give it to them. Step 5, the vow of truth. We are entering an age of deception, deep fakes, AI generated reality, and rewritten history. The most revolutionary act you can perform is to speak the truth, not your truth, but the truth. Objective reality. Refuse to lie. Refuse to repeat the slogans. Refuse to say that 2 plus 2 equals 5 just because the party says so. Hall taught that integrity is the currency of the spirit. Be the person who refuses to bend. Be the glitch in the matrix. When one person stands up and speaks the truth, it breaks the spell for everyone around them. Courage is contagious. Be the patient zero of courage. The final word. Manly P. Hall left us a warning, but he also left us a hope. He believed that the secret destiny was ultimately benevolent. He believed that God writes straight with crooked lines. Yes, we're going through the fire. Yes, the institutions are clapping. Yes, the shadows are terrifying. But the great work is not the New World Order. The New World Order is just the shadow. The great work is you. It is the evolution of the human species from a race of sleepwalking children into a race of awakened adults. The pressure is being applied to force us to grow. The diamond is being squeezed. Do not resent the pressure, but use it. Let the friction polish you. Let the fire purify you. The broken truth is that the system is rigged against you, but the whole truth is that you were built to transcend the system. The books are in the library, the symbols are in your hands. The choice is yours. Will you be a brick in their wall, or will you be the architecture of your own destiny? This has been The Broken Truth. We've peeled back the layers of history to show you the engine room of the world. We've handed you the keys that Manly P. Hall left behind. Now it's up to you to turn the lock. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, if you've listened to every word of this investigation, then you are the resistance. You're the ones who are paying attention. But listening is not enough. You have to spread the signal. The algorithm is designed to bury this story. They want you watching cat videos and celebrity gossip. They do not want you thinking about the philosophic empire. Defy them. Hit the follow button on Spotify right now. Rate the show 5 stars. Share this episode with one person who needs to wake up. We're building our own invisible college. We're building a network of minds that cannot be programmed. And we are just getting started. You think you know the story, but the reality is you have no idea. I'm your host, Garrett. Keep your eyes open, keep your mind sharp, and never stop digging. We'll see you in the shadows next time.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known. But you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.